Welcome, everyone. I am Zoyox from NEFX. That is spelled XXOIOXX, of course. And my position title within NEFX is ADMINN_1 admin 1. And I welcome you to podcast Event Core. The podcast is all about how all those other people out there are just not up to snuff. Just can't quite cut the mustard. And are a bunch of mouth-breathing simian funal morons who can't do their job. And how they should all just shut up and drop what they're doing and come listen to me. Because I'm smart. Also, presumably parts of the podcast have to do with Marathon and all of one. But that's what Big Dum Dum Norm wants you to think. In all seriousness, however, welcome. It is good to be able to speak to all of you again in this way. I have been wanting to do podcast Event Core again for some time. And one of the barriers to doing so, as well as to recording and uploading YouTube videos with my voice or face in them, has simply been the practical logistics of my living situation. But regardless, I appreciate you all attending this important hearing to understand what is at stake right now and why the source of salvation and alternate life transformation is basically a program that NEFX has invented. But in all seriousness this time, let us delve into what's happening with Marathon. With us, and with you. Yes, you. To begin with, what is old is new again. I have resumed uploading to YouTube some total carnage playthroughs of vintage custom mods and levels made for the original Marathon trilogy, including fairly lengthy and detailed single-player campaigns made decades ago that have been forgotten, such as may be found on the Bungie archives from the 90s and early 2000s. The most recent of these playthroughs has been a Marathon 2 solo campaign called The Alderian Connection by Rudy Blocks from 1998. Which is 6 levels that are actually quite creative, labyrinthine, full of action, and overall challenging. The mileage that the mapper got out of the space utilized could kind of make the levels seem bigger than they actually are. And there are a few odd and counterintuitive leaps you have to make in order to progress in a level. It is good to find and showcase buried gems like this, especially when you consider that they are not even total conversion standalone campaigns or otherwise particularly flashy. Just very creative and well-done vanilla scenarios that by their power seem like a whole new game despite essentially using all default assets and features. Preserving and archiving things like this become important, especially in these times of major flux and precarity regarding various forms of culture and long-term storage. Particularly digital storage methods for them. Beyond these campaigns, there have also been recorded total carnage demonstrations of XBLA survival matches, particularly unknown community favorites of multiplayer levels and of bot match multiplayer sessions. which I have been striving to test in as many existent classic marathon trilogy multiplayer levels as possible. Recording these playthroughs as something of a dual function for me, because by listening to an array of audiobooks, podcasts, newscasts, and other similar things, I am able to learn and stay informed as I perform this cultural preservation work, and this in turn furnishes me with more understanding, inspiration, and general material, which goes back into NEFX inventions as well as general life actions, and these in turn make their way back into marathon levels and scenarios that I make. As you may be aware, I am already working on a giant new marathon scenario since I finished my last one, which was Marathon Extraction. You lost. You lost. Like that scenario, this upcoming new one is intended to be 256 levels long, or the maximum amount of levels that can be had in an all-of-one level pack, and with a separate music track and text piece, aka terminal message, accompanying each of them. 256 levels, 256 text pieces, and 256 music tracks. Unlike Marathon Extraction, you lost. You lost. However, this scenario will proceed in linear campaign fashion instead of being an open-ended hub-based arcade-style one, making it essentially an epic campaign in its size and scope. Furthermore, the mountain I will be scaling to create this scenario will be steeper than the one I climbed to make Marathon Extraction. You lost. You lost, because I intend to create the material for it more from scratch instead of mainly altering and reappropriating existing material like I did for Marathon Extraction. You lost. You lost. The tentative title for this scenario is Marathon Hall of Mirrors. As some may recognize, this is in reference to a key feature of the scenario, or what is to say, the lack of a feature. This scenario will be bereft of surface textures, and imagery will stem purely from game sprites interacting with the engine quirk of all-of-one, where sprites seen in front of an untextured surface seem to have a smear effect. This is keeping in part with my interest in dynamic levels, in which the function of the level varies greatly between plays depending on the interaction of players and game characters with the environment, ensuring further that the level is never experienced the same way twice across replays. An example of dynamic levels would be the various platform-based levels I have made, such as the several I made for Marathon Extraction. You lost. You lost. Wherein the level consists primarily of 700 platforms with a different set of characteristics. For that matter, Marathon Hall of Mirrors may contain levels that are not only untextured but are also largely platform-based, meaning that both the structure and imagery of the level is highly dynamic and dependent on interaction between it and all actors within the level. In keeping with the theme implied by the title, Hall of Mirrors, All weapons will show in hand as being the sprite of the player character holding and using that weapon. And all enemies will show as different death animations of that player character. Thus it will seem that the player is at war with themselves in various nightmarish manifestations and from several angles at once. One exception will be that the Juggernaut will show as the skull ball that is seen in the multiplayer game mode Kill the Man with the Ball. This way it will seem as though the player is constantly staring their own death in the face. Possibly different manifestations of different deaths they have had across dimensions, timelines, and incarnations. I already have a pretty clear vision of how to create levels and music tracks for this, particularly in a way that is both efficient and robust, so as to create the 256 levels and music tracks in relatively little time. The primary issue at hand currently is deciding how to approach the text pieces. On one hand, writing these logs, or podcast event core scripts essentially, does help. Even if the terminal messages in the scenario do not feature all such material, they could theoretically be built from what seems to be the best and most important parts of these logs. It would not be dissimilar in that regard to a method I have been using a lot to create NEFX tracks, where I record keyboard improvisations into Logic Pro X and then go back and extract and edit the best parts into a coherent piece. On the other hand, this scenario could very well see the dawn of NEFX lyrics, where I write lyrics for each music track made for this scenario and feature them in the terminal. These lyrics would be phantom lyrics, meaning they would not actually be sung or heard within the music itself, but could be present for the listener to imagine their position and delivery in the track themselves. The open-endedness of formatting, grammar, etc. in lyrics means that it is easier to express various different ideas and reach page length using such a method than it would be to write prose essays, as I have mostly been doing for NEFX text pieces. Whereas said lyrics once converted into prose essay format would appear to be underwhelming in structure and in length. In lyrical format they seem impressively plentiful and thoughtful, which they are anyway. As it stands, the sets of lyrics that I write are longer and denser than the average sets of lyrics, and the more I write them, the better I get. They so far pertain to a wide variety of subjects of great stakes, and in writing about these various things I have found myself even more able to understand and remember them. Moreover, the lyrical format lends itself well to marathon terminal messages as people have come to remember and expect them, particularly the more abstract and cryptic ones that tend to show up more and more throughout the trilogy and especially by Marathon Infinity, which people have been happy to analyze and discuss. Many of these lyrics have been more directly in response and contemplation towards gathered outside stimuli. Others have arisen more from within. In any case, The lyrical approach is one way in which I believe I can attain to 256 powerful and robust pieces with relative efficiency, so that altogether the creation of Marathon Hall of Mirrors will not take too long. It could very well be that I not only take a variety of different approaches to creating text pieces as I have marathon levels and music tracks, but that I dedicate more specifically one of these approaches to each different scenario, or what I may call more broadly a multimedia NEFX package. Like with the aforementioned approach to a lot of music tracks and to the NEFX logbook text pieces, this lyrical approach to text pieces can arise largely from writing and gathering a set of raw material up to a certain amount and then editing it and shaping it into a set of coherent and robust pieces. It would not be hard to reach 256 pages of raw material, for example, and then to edit this. When I do so, I may make note of any surplus amount of raw material left over following the formation of 256 pieces, so that the next time I furnish terminal messages for a scenario I write even less pages of raw material so that I can create pieces and finish them faster. It is true that in expressing ideas in lyrical form, it becomes often easier and even more compelling and enjoyable to understand and remember them, though this is certainly not the only way to do so, as our understanding and remembrance increase of various things, and they become more of an integrated and even subconscious part of ourselves. So may they be more easily and fruitfully interpolated and integrated into various things we do, including informational pieces themselves, such as this one. Perhaps for that matter alternate versions of these lyric-accompanied music tracks could be made that do feature vocals of some sort delivering the lyrics, so that they can be clearly heard and absorbed that way and listeners have the option to hear both the instrumental version and the version with vocals. Of course, these would not feature my vocals per se, as I cannot sing, or at least they would not feature my vocals outright. But if some sort of powerful artificial voice like the one heard in this playback, but more aggressive, could be featured in those, that might become a more common feature of many FX tracks. Since for Marathon Hall of Mirrors I am planning to have accompanying lyrics for the tracks, it stands to reason that both the text pieces and the music tracks will be titled the same as things that belong together. I may as well also title the levels the same while I am at it, which will mark something of a historical first where the combined music tracks, text pieces, and marathon levels are not all titled differently. As to the levels, they will explore various different principles of labyrinth crafting, on a level deeper and broader than has yet been explored for Marathon, even by me. Furthermore, since the surface textures in this case are technically non-existent but rather dynamic and controlled and influenced by a combination of sprites and player perspective, This lends to a different approach to creating square-based grid levels, as many have come to know NEFX by. That is, for a lot of solo levels I have created, I have started with one of my WLAN mapping templates of fully pre-textured and pre-shaded polygons, and then gone through and unfilled some polygons so that they are negative space and show in-game as absolute and impenetrable walls. By unfilling enough polygons in the right places, I effectively create the structure for the level. The decision-making process for choosing which polygons to unfill level to level, or more broadly how to structure and design levels with this approach, may be experimented with and overall made more sophisticated in several different ways as more levels are created. By a combination of rigorous internal thought, pre-planning, and observation and adaptation, levels can be crafted with a mind to principles like symmetry, asymmetry, geometry, perspective, distance, flow, timing, logic, ratios, symbolism, etc. The overall effect will be greatly significant. This is in addition, of course, to levels which may be based on a big room of 700 platforms, as many levels in Marathon. Extraction shooter, you lost are. It is also worth noting that the overall psychological effect of the Hall of Mirrors imagery used, as well as that of having to navigate levels with such dynamic and disturbing imagery in place. The meeting of this unique challenge, combined with the esoteric effects of the design of the levels, music, and text pieces, will be incredibly and sublimely edifying to the player, especially should they dare to scale the mountain of playing the whole thing. As to the approaches to text pieces besides the lyrics options mentioned earlier, terminal messages could contain transcripts such as this one for podcast event core, perhaps divided into parts. They could also take the form of question pieces, or text pieces that consist entirely of a series of questions. How could I best approach these? One way would be to write one question for every sentence read, and then afterward to go back through and not only edit, but add more questions in as may occur to me. The main concern there would be making questions based on input material that are compelling and that genuinely question it while not being basic, lazy, or otherwise just mirroring what was already said. That is, I would not want to, upon reading a statement, simply ask why or how the thing mentioned in the statement is true. I would rather come up with a question that has seldom if ever been thought of before, yet which may strike the reader. Questions are powerful. Coming up with the right ones can sometimes be more important than trying to supply answers. Of course, there will also inevitably be biased questions that seem to imply an answer or a given of sorts, maybe even deliberately at times to be rhetorical or cheeky, or to take a hard stance. These question pieces would definitely not be without convictions, but they could be a broader and more open way to stimulate thought among those from various walks of life. Ideally, this would impel them to some degree in a similar general direction, even if the interpretations inevitably vary from person to person. Maybe, in keeping with the created then edit upon reaching a threshold of material approach, I could simply write at least one basic question for everything I am interested to learn about, and then upon creating enough raw material go back and add questions to each of these. Perhaps after enough questions are added based on one initial one, said initial one could be removed if it does not seem to be a strong or substantial enough question. Another approach would be to have a question diary. That is, to write questions that more naturally bear on the mind and spring naturally upon prompt to write, rather than seeking to create them from a set of material, or to generate an output from received inputs. I have created one question piece before, and it actually dealt with the question, or rather, questions of why and how to write a question piece, let alone an entire question book. Sometimes it seems like the easiest and surest way to write is about writing itself. On one hand, this does not seem, at least at first, to deal sufficiently with those high-stakes matters as I contend with and wish to write substantially about, as much as I struggle with that. But on the other hand, it seems more and more that as I continue to explore the boundaries of a relatively limited subject or set of subjects, I begin to more naturally and robustly push those boundaries into such subjects, starting from a more solid bedrock of exploration. This logging about projects, planning about planning, writing about writing, starts to operate like some sort of heuristic monologue, starting from more basic and foundational concepts that expand and billow out in multiple different directions into an entire universal system and fantasia of thought and possibility. It is as if the growing pressure of mounting thought from within a deliberately enclosed space creates such a clear sense of place and direction that when the thought finally spills over from that boundary, it is natural and sets the stage of direction of addition of thought that grows the whole entity from a ball to a planet. That is liberating. I have long been attracted to plumbing the depths of thought and even potential insanity, willing to go to the other side. Having said all this, we shall for now venture beyond contemplation of Marathon, Hall of Mirrors. I have been reflecting on my ideas for mods that heavily involve unusual methods of level navigation, as well as the widely considered blasphemies of the game and of games at large within the marathon community and beyond. My released 50-level mod marathon rules. The infinite recombinations of the way represents, among various other things, a convergence of these two things. It is a modern scenario based not only around platforms, but platform puzzles. Platform puzzles have been something of a faux pas within the marathon community thanks largely to the one in the level colony ship for sale sheep. From the first official marathon game, I appreciate platform puzzles including the infamous one in that level, and had by that point become obsessed with the possibilities of platforms in all of one in general. I decided to create Marathon rules to take on the premise of a scenario based purely around platform puzzles while taking a decidedly different and possibly better approach than the one from the first marathon. Accordingly, while it involves normal running and walking like most marathon levels, it requires the player to remotely fashion a set of platforms out of a total set of 700 into a staircase by which they can reach the exit. Following from this, I have considered other blasphemies of marathon and gaming in general, what may have earned them their reputation, and how they could be approached differently and daringly as an entire premise for a game. Two such blasphemies are sewer levels and swimming levels. Many official commercial games, including first-person shooters, have at least one of these two sorts of levels, despite such levels widely being considered infamous both individually and in concept. I take this as a challenge, and have serious ambitions to create an all-of-one marathon mod that consists entirely of levels taking place entirely under sewage and exploring some sort of sewage complex. Every level would thereby be both a sewer level and a swimming level all at the same time. The purpose of this mod would likely be a series of retrieval missions in the vein of my other scenario marathon, Keyfinder, the doomed myth of Destiny's Halo, but as under liquid expeditions where one has to plumb the depths of flooded sewer complexes to find specific items, and periodically return to an oxygen recharging station to avoid running out of oxygen and suffocating. I could configure physics and combat in this mod so that the player and all monsters can swim and shoot underwater, effectively making the mod an airborne shooter game in the vein of Descent. Having a mod like this in which travel within levels is technically easier and more open for the player, also makes it easier to design levels for the mod, and to realize more elaborate, experimental, and ambitious design visions uninhibited and without worry. At the same time, though there may be levels or even level packs for the mod dedicated heavily to combat in this unusual context, there may also be levels that do not include combat at all. I have been increasingly interested in exploring the possibilities of non-combat marathon mods as well as combat-oriented ones, and in making mods in which the enemy the player faces is more the environment and themselves than any outright combatant. This has certainly been explored in Marathon Sucks, Marathon Rules, the infinite recombinations for the way, and Marathon Ultra Mega Extreme Golf Master Dinosaur Egg Championship Super Bowl Cup 5000 3D. The Quest. Part of the reason for this is simply that the limits of the Aleph 1 engine, as great as it is, mean that implementing too many things and features in a map at once leads to game performance issues that render the level highly unenjoyable and impractical to play, if not outright unplayable. This leads to the consideration of mods which more singularly explore the possibilities of a limited set of things possible in the game. Because it is worthwhile to explore a possibility of a marathon mod that requires the foregoing of certain features, including those most commonly expected to be included in the mod, to realize in such great magnitude as has never been explored before. There will be more later. Thank you for listening.